Ask Earl Anything. This is the show where your questions make the show. It's been a while since I've done a show, but I wanted to do one this week. I have a few questions and a few things I just want to talk about today. So let's go to the questions, and I'll slip in what I want to talk about. My first question comes from Toasty. And Toasty left a question. He said, I could have sworn I left a comment. Looks like someone will not understand what I'm talking about first. Anyhow, great build up to power and energy. Maybe you can show off your mic placement in future videos. I know he kind of added to somebody's comment, and a lot of times when that happens, it doesn't show up as your comment. You're just adding to somebody else's comment, Toasty. Todd, who I've met in the real world. And I think he was commenting about my mic placement for this kit. Now, this drum kit right here, I am using 4 mics presently. I have a D112E on the kick drum. Today I have got a Sennheiser E609 on the snare drum. And overheads, I've got 2 Octava, they're Octava MK012s, Russian-made microphones, condenser mics, in an XY pattern. And it's about where my fingertips are, probably out of the camera shot, because I don't want it in the camera shot. So it's about, I don't know, maybe 3 feet above the kit, probably about 5.5 feet off the ground. So that's pretty much my mic setup for this particular kit. And a lot of the jazz videos I've done recently or covers on the little kit have been that mic setup. The reason why I'm going to a 4 mic setup for this little kit, number one, it's room on my board. I have 4 channels. I actually have 6 channels on the board I could use and mic the 2 toms if I wanted to. It's just more cables and mess in the studio and stuff. My other kit, I've got mic'd up with a Beta 52 on the kick drum, front head. Now my kick drum on my other Gretsch kit, my 20-inch, 14 by 20-inch Gretsch kit, presently has it has 2 heads on it with no hole in it. So the way I get that kind of punchy, fat sound out of that kick drum these days, and it's been going on for about 2 months now, is I put a pillow leaning up against the bass drum head. And when I put the pillow against the front bass drum head, it kills some of the front overtones, and it makes that punchier, even with the mic on the outside without having it in the drum. Overheads for the Gretsch kit, the Walnut Gretsch kit, are SM81s, Shure SM81s, and they're about 3.5 feet above the kit, probably. A little bit higher than these. And they're in an XY pattern over the kit too, pretty much. My tom mics for the Gretsch Walnut kit, SM57s on the 2 rack toms, and I've got an ATM Pro 25 on the floor tom, Pro 25 was a bass drum mic, one of the early kit mics for Audio-Technica before they started making even cheaper kit mics. So the Pro 25 was kind of like the brother of the ATM 25, which was the pro level kick drum mic that Audio-Technica made in the 90s, early 2000s. And on the snare drum, I have an SM57 as the over the top snare mic, which is kind of a classic snare mic to have on any snare drum. The hi-hat mic I'm using presently is a AKG C1000C, and I've had that mic for 20-something years. It was one of the first mics I bought for my studio, along with the SM57 and the D112E. And that was my first set of overheads. I have a pair of those. I have a pair of the Octavas. I have a pair of the SM81s. So those are I use small diaphragm condenser microphones for miking my overheads. For my toms, it's usually cardioid dynamic mics, pretty much. That's what an SM57 is, or the Audio-Technica Pro 25, or I have a Sennheiser MD421 which is a really nice mic. I wish I had three of those big mics. I use them every once in a while. I had it on the snare for a while here. It's a great kick drum mic too. And I've got some oddball, cheaper drum kit mics, like a set of Audio-Technica. They're drum mics, which actually sound fine. And I could use them all the time, but I kind of use the 57s for everything around here pretty much. If I had a session where I needed to do a 57 on the top and the bottom, I might pull those mics out. Or I was going to mic the large, the Octa Plus type kit, the Pearl Fiberglass kit, and with mics on every drum, I would have to do something with needing some more tom mics, and I would pull them out. I have a lot of microphones, okay? Everything's running into a PreSonus Studio Live 24x4x2 board. The mics on the Gretsch Walnut kit are going into some boutique preamps, 7-Circle Audio. If you've never heard of 7-Circle Audio and you're an audiophile type guy, check them out. I have 4 mic pre's, 2 John Hardy copy pre's, they call them J99s, 1 A12, which is an API 512 copy, and the other one is a Neve copy, a Neve N72 copy. They call it N72. So it's the Neve 1072 is basically what it's copying. And it's the design of the preamp is exact to those models, and some of the parts that are used for it that is part of the kit that you make. This was an interesting concept. You actually could take this home and solder it together and put it together if you wanted to. Now I had a guy that makes mic pre's for guys in Nashville make my mic pre's. So they sound really good. They're all balanced out, and they've gone through all that testing you need to go through to kind of make sure that the noise levels are right and everything coming through the pre's. I have had no problems with them. They're about anywhere from $150 to $500 per channel. The Neves and the APIs are about $500 a channel. The chassis itself is about $500 with the power supply, and the chassis holds about 8 of these preamps. So I could add 4 more if I want to someday. I've got $2,000 invested in it, and that's about as deep as I'm going with my mic pre's. The PreSonus board sounds really good. Matter of fact, I get great sounds out of these microphones here. I'm quite happy with the sounds I'm getting through the PreSonus board, but I can tell the difference using the J99s on the overheads on that kit, on that drum kit. The Gretsch Walnut kit sounds a little different, a little bit more in your face, but this is fine for drum covers. Most guys don't know it. It's the other stuff I put on my drum covers, the Universal Audio plugins I put in my chain and my Logic Audio plugins and the EQs and things that really punch it out. And as I've said before many times, I don't spend a lot of time on my drum mixes even. And sometimes I notice a little few things. But I've got kind of a template I work from that allows me to work quickly. And I think my stuff sounds as good as anybody else's stuff out there right now on the internet. I mean, there's a couple guys that like to play around in the studio, like getting different sounds and muffling techniques and, vintage microphones and stuff. If I had so much work and I was making so much money with the studio, I'd invest in those kinds of things. But my investment in microphones stopped about, I would say probably solidly 7-8 years ago. I stopped buying a lot of microphones. I think the last microphone I bought was a Rode NTK tube mic, and it was a friend was selling one that gave me a pair of them, so I have a pair of those too. So anyhow, hope that helps, Todd. That was your question. The next question comes from Power E Studio, and he asked me a question. This is a great question. I did some research. Great channel, Earl. I wonder if you know what drum kit Steve Gadd used on the Chick Corea album, The Leprechaun, released in 1976. Can it be the Pearl Fiberglass kit? And the Pearl Fiberglass kit is the double-headed Pearl Fiberglass tom kit. Which is the reason I bought my Pearl Fiberglass tom kit, was to put 2 heads on them and do that Gadd thing. I was going to paint it black and have the fiberglass toms with double heads on it and kind of go that direction with it. That was a really popular thing to do in New York City at that time. Steve Jordan had a kit like that. He had some Pearl concert toms turned into double-headed toms for a little kit he had. There's a concert of him playing at Montreux with the Brecker brothers that he's using. I think he's using the 8 and the 10 toms with a little Gretsch kit he's got. I don't think they're Gretsch toms. I think they're the Pearl toms. And I just saw Rick Murata's doing it. Rick Murata had some Gretsch toms he converted, but he also had a set of the Pearl ones, and it's in the movie FM with Linda Ronstadt. I was watching a clip from that the other day, and I love Rick Murata's playing. And Rick Murata had an 8 and a 10, and they are Pearl. They look like Pearl fiberglass toms converted into concert toms converted into double-headed toms. Now the question is, did he play it on the Leprechaun, which is the Chick Corea album? And I've looked and I've looked and I've looked, and it looks like the album The Leprechaun was done, I think, in Los Angeles. So if it was done in Los Angeles, there's a possibility it wasn't. But if it was done in New York, then there's a possibility it could be that. And you know what? I think I'm going to come back. I'm going to see if I can find my Leprechaun album and look at exactly what studio it was done in, because that was the question I couldn't get answered through Google on the internet. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I will tell you, I've got a couple Chick Corea albums. These are my albums from back in the day, back when I was doing it. And I got the Chick Corea Friends album, which Gadd played all over this album. This is a great album. This is my favorite Chick Corea album, I think. And in the background, I think the white Gadd kit is on this, because there's a picture of him with the white drums in the background. It's Joe Farrell and Eddie Gomez. And it looks like it could be the Pearl kit. So there's a good possibility that Gadd was playing those drums on Chick Corea Friends. Now, did he play it on the Leprechaun? That's a tough one, because the Leprechaun, I'm having a hard time finding where it was recorded at. So let's keep looking. And there is no mention of the studio that was recorded at. And that's been the hard thing, has been trying to find out where he actually recorded this album at. So from what I can tell, this album, The Leprechaun, it looks like it might have been done in LA for some reason, but I'm not sure. So again, the drum sound like those Gadd toms. So there's the possibility it's it, but there's nothing on the album that indicates it, or not. But I knew when I looked at the Friends album, there's that one picture down in this corner of the white kit. And it looks like it could have been 10, 12, 14. It definitely looks like the white kit that I've seen pictures of. So I guess that's the answer to the question. There's a possibility it's on Leprechaun, but it is on Friends, it looks like. So that's really cool. And it's a great question. And you know, how many times Gadd got to use those drums in the studio is always a question, because in New York, a lot of times in New York, you didn't get to use your drums. You got stuck using whatever was there. But there's some stories about Rick Murata and Gadd and then some other guys in town like Steve Jordan, who basically wanted to have somebody do their cartage for them because they didn't want to use the crappy studio drums, and that was the problem. So Gadd and Murata revolted, and there's like a Modern Drummer article of Rick Murata talking about this, the very first one, which Peter Criss is on the cover of it. I have a copy of it somewhere in my Modern Drummer collection. Peter Criss is the drummer featured on the cover, but Rick Murata is inside. Rick Murata also talked about some really cool things on that one. He talked about having a Ludwig Superphonic 5x14. That he had an ECM50, Sony ECM50 microphone, condenser mic, lapel mic, inside the snare drum. So I tried a lapel mic inside the snare drum. It was an interesting sound for getting the snares, you know. Not a great microphone. It was actually a terrible lapel mic. I tried using it in the studio to do some videos early on. Got very bad results with it. So, but yeah, and they're all going for this. This is what they were doing. This was the Gadd thing. I mean, this is this was a concert tom. This was a Gretsch concert tom. Now, how you know it's a Gretsch concert tom is that Gretsch made their concert toms for 10-inch toms as a 6 lug. Gretsch doesn't use 6 lug toms for their 8x10s or anything that has a die-cast hoop on it. Now this has die-cast hoops on it because I put Pearl die-cast hoops on it. I wanted that Pearl die-cast sound. What I originally had was a triple flange on here. And then I had some lugs from a snare drum I bought that I took apart. You can tell this tom has been drilled for tom mounts, different mounts of different types. Anyhow, this is what guys are going for. They were putting that bottom head on there. So when I got this concert tom, I said, the first thing I did was I drilled it out and put my, made this a double-headed tom. I have since had the edges redone by Resurrection Drums in Hollandale Beach. And that's why the drum kind of sounds okay, because if the edges aren't right, then the drum doesn't sound okay. But everybody was going for these little 6.5x10s, and that was kind of the thing back in the late 1970s. And my first Gretsch kit at Professional Percussion Center, they tried to sell me the 6.5x10, the 8x12, the 9x13, 10x14 on the tom, on the mounted on the stands with the Pearl mounts. And I didn't want that. I wanted 2 floor toms. I wanted a 14 and a 16 floor tom, 14x14, 16x16, and I wanted an 8x12 and a 9x13. And I eventually got an 8x10 tom, and I got an 8x8 tom later on down the road. About a year or two down the road, I got the 8x10, and then I bought the 8x8 by the time I got married. So pretty wild. All right, couple other things I wanted to talk about. Those are the 2 questions I had for Ask Earl Anything. One other thing I wanted to do was kind of a NAMM show 2019 wrap-up. So I looked at the NAMM coverage this year, and I have to tell you, I was disappointed in the drum coverage for NAMM. But I don't think I'm disappointed in the companies doing the coverage. I think I'm disappointed in the NAMM 2019 selection. There really didn't seem to be a whole heck of a lot coming out. Now let's talk about a few things that did come out that were really cool, okay? Meinl, which I'm not a Meinl player, you guys have heard me talk about this. Meinl came out with their version of a thin jazz cymbal. I think they call them the Binance Foundry cymbals. So they're made in Turkey, and they're kind of like in the vein of the Coropes. I'm only going to say that because I'm trying to give you kind of a reference point. But they look like really thin jazz cymbals. And they sound like really thin jazz cymbals, hammered, heavily hammered. And it was time for them. Coropes came out the next year. Paiste came out with the big beats, which was the 2002s with the hammering in it. Zildjian came out with the Avidus line. So it was like 2014 Coropes, 2015 the Avidus cymbals and the Paiste big beats with the hammering in it. Sabian already had the Artisans, and it was time for Meinl to kind of get into that space with something. I mean, all their dark cymbals in the Byzance line, and I don't know if that's how you say it or not. I think it's called Byzance. All those dark cymbals are thin and really dark, but these seem to be kind of more like the brighter jazz, but still dark, thin cymbals. I was excited about those. Those kind of sounded pretty cool. And I thought, coming out of the gate, there was some videos on that, and I thought this is going to be a great show. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't a great show. The drum companies were lackluster at best. Gretsch had a little micro kit, a Brooklyn kit that came out before the show, and Mark Juliana did a video on it. I thought that was kind of cool. Pearl was hawking their rack, their Icon rack. It's funny, Pearl has renamed their square tubing rack the Icon rack years ago. That's because they don't want to pay Jeff Porcaro's family for the real name of that rack. The original squared rack was the Jeff Porcaro rack, drum rack. He was the one him and Paul Jameson created that drum rack. So Paul cut his family out of that money a long time. Pearl cut the Porcaro family out of the money for that rack years ago, unless they get a piece of the Icon, which I doubt. But they were hawking this new Icon rack. I don't know why people want to go to racks and stuff, but I guess if you're playing on big stages, racks are cool. I mean, if I was on a major tour, that rack thing is the way to go. But if you're playing little clubs, hoofing your gear, I can't imagine pulling that out all the time. But that was Pearl's thing. Pearl also came out with a maple gum shell, kind of like Gretsch. So they've got their version of a Gretsch shell now. DW's got their version of a Gretsch shell. Of course, Gretsch has the original, maple gum shells on their USA custom drums or the vintage Gretsch drums from the Jasper era of Gretsch drum shells. Okay, so Pearl's got their version of that now, and that looked cool. Ludwig had, a nice assortment of drums, but nothing really new or different. I still think the best Ludwig drums out there are the mahogany, 3-ply mahogany. I think they call them vintage mahogany, with the maple re-rings. If you're gonna get a Ludwig kit, go for those to get that really cool Ludwig mahogany sound. But that wasn't anything new. You've been able to get them for a couple years now. DW didn't have anything that was that cool. They got some real high-end kit if you want to buy it. I forget it was some funky wood. I don't even remember it. It kind of blew by me. And the coverage on this was kind of sketchy anyhow. Zildjian came out with some stackers cymbals that looked kind of cool, but they didn't even get any coverage. Like, nobody was really there, and Paiste didn't get much coverage. Paiste's 30th anniversary for the Signature Series line, and they reintroduced some signature cymbals that have been out of the line for a while, and that's what was shown at the show. But again, nothing really cool that I could see. I didn't hear from Dream here are the two duds for me at the NAMM show. Let's go to the duds. The first dud is Mapex. I love Russ Miller's playing. I think he's a great player. He's also an inventor and stuff. And they came out with this crazy tom mount that's got a magnetic force and holds it up, but it looks like it's like some kind of a Rector set metal prototype thing. It doesn't look like it could possibly be sold in the stores, but they're selling it. I just think it looks so ugly. I can't imagine it adds that much to the sound that it's worth it. Because a lot of guys think the rims mounts are ugly, and they do add something to the sound. That's the interesting thing. I never thought rims mounts were anything until I went to Nashville and did a record, and I hit the first tom that was on a regular Pearl mount with the arm stuck in it, and the other one was on a rims mount, and it was dead as a doorknob to that boom. So rims mounts work. I mean, that's the problem with the toms being mounted on stands too. The toms being mounted on stands, if it's tight, then it doesn't ring enough. Okay? Now, this is that basket stand. That's the only thing that will hold the 10. But I am getting the Tama tom stand. It's coming with my vintage classic hardware. So if you saw my video on this Tama classic hardware, and by the way, this stuff is Ludwig. This is freaking Ludwig, man. I took some of the parts of this classic hardware and stuck it in an old Ludwig stand I have, and they fit perfectly. This is Ludwig, man. They basically took Ludwig and said, we're gonna make it. Ludwig doesn't care anymore. We're making it. So they did. The hi-hat stand's amazing compared to the Ludwig hi-hat stands. I will say that. It's just so much better than the Ludwig hi-hat. But the snare stand, Ludwig. But I'm looking forward to getting the tom stand. The one thing I will say about the snare stand is that as tight as it is, it just seems like it resonates better on these stands. Well, this isn't gonna. I don't have the zero ring. I got all this muffling on it. But it just seems to resonate better than on the basket stands that are really tight. And DW saw that a couple years ago. They started making their snare stands with kind of like a spongy rubber thing, and I think the Tama Classic seems to have that. I'm going to see if the tom stand sounds better than my Ludwig, because I have an old Ludwig one I was using for the 12, And that tom stand seemed to resonate better. So I think some of the problems with the snare basket approach for your tom is it just kills the tom, where a rims mount doesn't kill the tom. So back to Mapex. Mapex makes this crazy thing. I just think it's just the ugliest thing ever. But you got to give them an A for effort, an F for look. I just think the thing looks terrible. So I have no use for it. I wouldn't spend the money. And it's only on their highest end drums. You're not going to get it on any of their cheaper drums anyhow. So you have to spend it, the $5,000-$6,000 drum kit to get those crazy tom mounts. So Russ Miller will be playing them. Maybe a couple other artists will, but I don't think anybody else is going to be playing those things. But here's the worst one of the show. The worst company of the show move was Sabian. Sabian changed their logo. I don't ask me why they changed such a classic logo. Now that they're on top with sales, I think they're the top selling cymbal company in the world right now. They beat Zildjian somehow, and now they're going to mess with their logo. So maybe they're waning a little bit and they thought it was time to rebrand. But the one thing Zildjian never did was rebrand. That Zildjian logo is the Zildjian logo. There's been no rebranding. That Zildjian is Zildjian. It's the same Zildjian that was their logo back years ago. It comes off of their original, it doesn't really come off of the stamp, but that's the logo that everybody knows. And Sabian has a logo everybody knows, and now they're messing with it. So I don't know why. The Paiste did something to their logo a few years ago that wasn't as drastic. But the Sabian basically retooled their AAX line. They took studio and stage out. Now they have thin, medium, and heavy. They still have explosion. So if you're a Sabian guy, you're going to love those. You love those cymbals, then you're going to buy those. I like the concept of going to thin, medium, heavy. That's cool. But I just don't like their logo. I think it looks ugly. And I think that was probably the worst thing for the drums and percussion market at the show. All right. But the NAMM coverage on YouTube was really lame. The best NAMM coverage on YouTube was the drum shop in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Okay, I forget. Is that how they go? By drum shop in Portsmouth, New Hampshire? I forget. Anyhow, I'm a subscriber to that channel. Theirs was far and away the best, most thorough NAMM coverage. So if you want to see some great NAMM coverage and hear them talking about the show, those guys did the best. But there's a couple other companies that normally, Long and McQuaid, and these are companies they're like resellers. They did some nice coverage, but I just didn't see anything exciting at NAMM this year for anything that I'm like waiting with bated breath to get. And normally when you come after NAMM, and you see the Cropes come out, or you see the Avidus line come out, or the Big Beats, I was like, I got to get my hands on one of those. This year I don't have anything I want to get my hands on. I found the classic hardware prior to the NAMM show, and that came out after last year's NAMM show. So somewhere mid-year, the classic hardware got pushed out, pretty much with no fanfare at all. And that's because it's a niche market. Guys that have vintage kits, it looks really cool with vintage kits, and there's jobbing guys that are going to use it. And I think for the money, this stand is just as good as the DW. It's just as good as the Gibraltar out there. It's just as good as the Pearl and the Ludwig. I think you're in the same ballpark, except this is a classic. And they're just as strong. So I'm going to go with the classic look. Plus, there's just something about it. So I really dig this hardware. But that was pre-NAMM. Now, this was in the NAMM show and some of the TAM stuff. They showed some kits that had the classic hardware on it. Mostly small jobbing drummer kits. But nothing there that turned me on. They got their Star line. It's great. Those are great drums. Gretsch has got their line. That's the one thing about Gretsch. They're not going to change very much. Ludwig didn't even really have any snare drums that I was like oogling over, saying I got to get some of those. Anyhow, that's it for Ask Earl Anything. I totally rambled this one. 2 questions and my comments turned into a long show, but thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy it. Leave questions, because questions make the show. And I don't think I missed anybody's questions, but if I missed your question, let me know, and I'll get right on it, I promise. We'll get another show quicker out there. But hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Bye. Bye.